There are many Zelda clones out there that you might be missing out on, and that's a shame. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? These games are similar to Zelda games in one way or another, and I dare say that every Zelda fan should give these games a try. So let me share with you a bunch of Zelda clones and why they are like Zelda. Some of these will definitely surprise you. Let's look. Golvellius for the Sega Master System. Golvellius Valley of Doom is an action-adventure game developed by Compile and released for the Sega Master System in 1988. The game follows the adventures of a warrior named Kalisis, who must rescue his kidnapped love interest, Rina, from the evil sorcerer Golvellius. This fantasy world looks much like Zelda, of course, consisting of several interconnected regions, each with its own unique landscapes and enemies. Now, I can't really say that is unique to Zelda, but it does kind of look the part. Kalisis must explore these regions, defeat monsters and bosses, and collect power-ups and items to progress. The gameplay has you changing from a top-down overworld like Zelda 1 to a side-scrolling portion like Zelda 2. Here's the big change: Kalisis can't turn around lest he turn into a pillar of salt. Not really, but I mean, it's weird. He must always be focused on the goal ahead, as distractions will likely cause the loss of his beloved Rina. I'm kidding. That's not necessarily true. I don't know if it's true. It's just that he doesn't turn around. Way to focus on the future, baby. Kalisis will encounter different NPCs who can provide him with useful information or sell him helpful items for an absolute war price. Much of the game here is grinding mobs for monies, and then looking for holes to pop up on screen so you can travel into these holes and find folks that are willing to help. It's just kind of odd that everyone is so, bunkered, but hey, whatever. The dungeons in this game, again, are 2D side-scrollers or sometimes top-down screens that progress much like an arcade shooter. It's odd, but it's charming. It's almost like Undead Line for the Genesis. Listen, I'm sure other games did this first, but this came to mind immediately, the Undead Line game that is. These bosses hold items that are necessary for progression in the game. Sometimes they affect the overworld. You know, it's important to, kill the bosses. Swim underwater, jump higher, become just more powerful. These abilities will allow him to access previously unreachable areas and find, hidden secrets. In the final showdown, Kalisis must defeat Golvellius in a battle to the death to rescue Rina and save the world from his evil rule. Yeah, it's familiar, but this game is so fun. It has flaws, as any game does, but the charm of this is just too much. These graphics look like Adventure Island type stuff in places, the sprites are large and colorful, and the bosses are neat. It's just a good time. As of the recording of this video, I can't find any place where it is part of a collection, available for purchase, or anywhere like that. If you know of any place, please let me and others know in the comments. I highly recommend checking this one out. It's good. Crusader of Senti. Now, this one likely isn't too much of a surprise, as retro enthusiasts have often touted this game as the Sega Zelda game, but it's certainly worth mentioning. Crusader of Senti is like A Link to the Past Sega style, with some impressive character animations and larger sprites, and that blapping but banging Sega Genesis music. There's nothing on the soundtrack that I'm adding to a playlist in my car or anything like that, but it's not bad. It fits the game and it's good. It's worthy. Every tune in it is enjoyable, and that's particularly important. If Link could speak to animals like, Dr. Dootingle or something, this game would be spot on. The biggest difference, in my opinion, is using animals to accomplish things like opening doors and pathways, fighting enemies sometimes. You get to a point that you can't speak to humans anymore early in the game, and you have to rely on animals for information. That's like hard mode Dr. Dolittle. But you see the similarity. You get it. Crusader of Senti, I have concluded by others' comments, and the time that I have spent with it, is not a particularly difficult game. It has enough challenge to keep it interesting, but it seems like it's aimed at a younger or just a more casual audience. This certainly doesn't keep it from being a fun and engaging game, though. The game is wildly expensive. It's bonkers how expensive this game is. It's certainly in the upper echelon of expensive games for the Sega Genesis, going for several $100s, even loose for the Genesis. To my understanding, it has not been made available anywhere for purchase other than the Sega Genesis, though. With this in mind, be prepared to emulate or shell out some absolutely major dough for it if you're wanting to play it, but I do recommend it. This next game, also kind of expensive, unfortunately, but there are some games later in the list that are cheaper and are more readily available in different places. Golden Axe Warrior for the Sega Master System. I think this could be my favorite Zelda clone on this list. That is not to say that the other ones aren't wonderful, it's just this one is so particularly good. I have to admit that I didn't put a lot of stock into the Sega Master System until more recently. After playing Phantasy Star, Govelius, and Golden Axe Warrior, I have to say I'm stoked to check out other games on the system. I know there's a ton of crap, as there is for every system, but I found some really cool stuff on the Sega Master System since I've been exploring. I think this Zelda clone nearly perfectly captures that spirit. Had different sprites been used in the game, and the names changed to Zelda lore, I would have believed that this is the sequel to Zelda 1 for the NES over what became Zelda 2 for the NES. Combat is difficult at times, and grinding for monies is a bit tedious, but outside of that, the game is, dare I say, wonderful. If I could just take off my nostalgia goggles for a moment, which I can't, unfortunately, I think I could even be convinced that this is superior to the original Zelda. But alas, Hyrule has my heart and my eyes. The music definitely is a little inferior to the original Zelda. I simply prefer those tunes over these, and unfortunately, I can't remove my love from those songs from the equation. While this game is no slouch in the music department, it's simply not as memorable as Zelda so far. The enemies are often pretty comparable to Zelda, so I certainly can't fault that here. The implementation of gameplay mechanics like purchasing feathers for traversal and doing what I would consider side quests for folks along the path is a welcome addition to this game. The overworld, the map, the dungeons are incredibly reminiscent of Zelda. They don't take the exact pattern, but it's basically like, hey, can I copy your homework? Sure, just make sure you change the words around a little bit so the teacher doesn't get angry. And as a teacher, I am incredibly familiar with that. But you know what? A good answer is a good answer. And a good answer is what this game is. It's Zelda 1, but just more. Graphically, it's more impressive than Zelda 1. That's to be expected, as this hardware was a little superior in certain degrees, including a higher color palette. The sprites are a little more detailed. The portraits of Saruman the Wise are really impressive as well. Some of the most fun that I've had this entire game so far, which is sincerely a throwaway feature that is in so many other games, was gambling. I learned I have a problem. Sort of like the gamble of the hall is the gameplay itself. It's always a risk leaving the comfort of the town. Until you are prepared and have well noted the abilities and dangers of every direction and every enemy, you are doomed to die. The punishment for death isn't so grievous that you don't want to play, but it's enough to make you value your life and tread carefully. It's a nice balance. Every item and every note is worth having and makes you just a little less likely to die when you traverse, and honestly, that's addictive. I was constantly finding areas that I couldn't get into, and I would wonder which items I would find that would allow me to further progress, which is much like that Zelda mentality. Which boss would be guarding which treasure that would bring me closer to gain a Death Adder, This game, again, is terribly expensive for the Sega Master System, but it is great. It's one that I could see myself scripting and saving to own because I enjoyed it that much. If you're interested in playing it otherwise, it's included as an unlockable on the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection for the PS3 and the Xbox 360. So physically, as of the making of this video, you can either own the original or the PS3 and Xbox 360 Sega compilation. Certainly, this is a worthy Zelda clone, and it's not a surprise that it goes for so much money. So the next game is not quite as faithful to Zelda as this previous game was, but it is gorgeous. It's such a pretty game. Let's check it out. Alundra the Dreamweaver. Whoa, Dreamweaver! In this PS1 game, you play as the titular Alundra, who arrives in his village and quickly discovers that the villagers are plagued by a recurring nightmare that is causing people to die in their sleep. Alundra soon learns that he is the only one who can save the villagers from their nightmare, as he has been chosen by the gods to be the Dreamwalker. Folks are trying to resurrect an ancient evil, and it's up to Alundra to stop them. This game is, of course, similar to Zelda, or, well, it wouldn't be on this list. The biggest tie to Zelda in Alundra is the focus on the puzzles in the dungeons. There's plenty of puzzles to tickle your noodle in this one, and they will tickle your noodle indeed. In terms of gameplay and mechanics, both Alundra and Zelda involve exploration, of course, collecting items and using those items to overcome obstacles and defeat enemies, and both games also feature boss battles at the end of the dungeons or levels. I mean, having a boss battle at the end of the dungeon isn't like something crazy unique or anything. That happens in a lot of games. It's pretty common. But this setup looks so much like Zelda. If you're looking for some more mature themes, maybe some more emotional depth than the typical old school Zelda games, check this one out. It's like a dark, broody Zelda spin-off, more akin in tone to like Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess, focusing on death, loss, and redemption. Nevertheless, I think Zelda fans will see the similarities here and appreciate it. I have to admit, this game is a bit tough. Working Designs infamously cranked up the HP and damage on the enemies to sort of increase the difficulty of the game. I think I prefer it just a little less difficult and the mobs being a little less bullet spongy, but it's still an awesome game with absolutely gorgeous graphics. An early criticism of the game back when it was released was that it looked too much like a 16-bit game, but I think that's definitely part of the appeal and charm. I mean, look at them sprites. Oh, it's lovely. Wouldn't it be lovely? And the lighting, the character portraits, oh, it's all just top notch. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, the PS1 or emulation is the only way to play this game currently. If this game is available digitally or as part of a collection, please, again, sound off in the comments and let folks know. It'd be awesome to see this game made widely available so others could have an easier time playing it. This next game is certainly one to pick up if you can find it cheap. You're probably more likely to see it in the wild more so than Alundra. 3D Game Heroes. 3D Game Heroes is a love letter to retro video games. I mean, look at this thing. The game takes place in the kingdom of Dotnia, which is in peril after the evil Dark Lord Onyx steals 6 magical orbs that keep the kingdom's peace and prosperity. These 6 orbs operate much like any other Zelda game, where you need to go to dungeons and collect each orb, solving puzzles along the way, exploring each dungeon, and killing a boss at the end of each section. Along the journey, the hero gains, well, new weapons and abilities, how about that, such as a boomerang and bombs, and these are essential to progressing, much like in Zelda. These dungeons are scattered around on a, of course, Zelda-looking map. There's a desert temple, there's a forest temple, well, I mean, you get the idea. Screen to screen, you're fighting hordes of monsters with this gigantic sword. Oh! It starts kind of small, but eventually it gets huge, enough that it almost covers each screen entirely. Hard to miss with that thing. Even a blind squirrel gets a nut every once in a while. I mean, if you can't kill a bee with this thing, you likely couldn't hit a hog in the hind end with a handful of rice. I didn't finish this game until years after I purchased it. I actually contracted COVID over Christmas break of 2021 and played this in a fever dream state. Maybe that would have been more appropriate for Alundra, but this was the game that found my fixation. Something I certainly noted over last time I played is how difficult the game gets in the end. By the end of the game, I was really struggling to complete certain fights. The game looks beautiful and it looks simple, but its simplicity goes right out the door near the end of the game. The last few dungeons are wildly difficult, with few checkpoints in between. If you intend on finishing this one, brace yourself for a bit of a difficulty spike in the end. Holy smokes. My favorite part of the game though, the graphics. Hubba hubba. The graphics are heavily inspired by classic 8-bit and 16-bit games, evoking feelings of nostalgia for gamers who grew up playing games from that era, notably many Zelda fans. Despite the blocky, pixelated style, the graphics are incredibly detailed, with each individual block of the game's world carefully crafted to create a cohesive and immersive environment. Holy smoke, that's a lot of consonants in there. Right, bottle! The game's graphics are consistent throughout, with the same blocky style used for everything, from the characters to the environments to the user interface. This cohesion certainly keeps the game charming all the way throughout. When it came out, I wager to say that there was nothing that looked like it. I didn't even have to see gameplay to fall in love with it. As soon as I saw a screenshot, I was sold, baby. I was sold. This game is as lovely today as when I first feasted my eyes on it. It is a marvel to behold, and if nothing else, everyone should give it a go just for the nostalgia of it. Every game so far has been rooted in fantasy, but there's a few coming up that are not fantasy games, but are still very Zelda-like, so stick around. How can a game not be fantasy, but be Zelda-like? Oh baby, just you wait. Rambo for the NES. Rambo, that's right, Rambo for the NES. This is the one I figured nobody was going to believe. Rambo for the NES is a clone of Zelda 2 for the NES, and it's not bad. It's a side-scrolling action game released in 1988. The game is based on the Rambo movie franchise, particularly the second movie, Rambo First Blood Part 2. Confusing title, but whatever. Instead of Link, where Sylvester Stallone is Rambo. No, it's Rambo, not Rambo. Instead of Link, where Sylvester Stallone I can't say Sylvester Stallone. Instead of Link, we're Sylvester Stallone Instead of Link, we are Sylvester. Got it. Instead of Link, we're Stallone as Rambo, the former Green Beret who was sent on a mission to rescue American prisoners of war held in Vietnam. The game is very similar to the plot of the movie, with Rambo fighting his way through various levels of enemies, including soldiers, tanks, and helicopters, to reach his objective. Just a wild soldier doing wild things. Speaking of which, there's some odd dialogue choices given in this game. To start the game, you have to say yes. I mean, you can say no, but the dude won't do anything until you say yes. He even tells you this. Later, you're given a choice as to which question to ask someone, and you choose some old Greg sort of stuff like, do you like me? Could you come to love me? Do you want me to save your family? Just, it's sort of an odd thing to add to a game like this. Say yes. Do you want to go on this mission, Rambo? No, I'm good. Rambo, what should we do next? Do you like me? Sort of like spells in Zelda 2, Rambo will collect weapons and power-ups along the way. Players avoid hazards such as traps and mines while navigating a side-scrolling map, which is really pretty confusing and probably the worst part of the game. Navigating around this map will eventually lead you to prisoners of war who will share important information with you. It's certainly better than get candle and corrupt palace. Go west. I'd read on some forum that this game was similar to Zelda 2, but I had no idea how similar it would be. Rambo has the same sort of jumping and swinging momentum as Link does. He travels through caves into certain areas to collect items and rescue people. It's just painfully obvious when you start to look at it that it's basically Zelda 2. A couple of other things to note in this game is the interaction with the NPCs for direction in a non-linear exploration game, and the accumulation of experience points for killing things while you explore. While tonally, I'd argue they are very, very different. I certainly think there's a case to be made that this game is enough like Zelda 2 to call it a clone. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments. The unfortunate thing about this game is its lack of port to anything at the moment. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it's out there. The only choice I know is that people would have to buy the NES cartridge or, of course, emulate it. The good news is that Rambo is relatively cheap and pretty widely available. So from a game certainly rooted in more so reality, back into some fantasy stuff. Let's look at Faxanadu. Faxanadu is yet another game comparable to Zelda 2. This one focuses much more on story, it seems. It felt like a good portion of the game was me wandering around towns and gathering information from the locals on what I should do next. The combat in Zelda 2 I think is fine, but I was a little disappointed in Faxanadu's combat. I had literally no idea until I was researching further information to this game that it is a sort of spin-off from the Dragon Slayer series. That's super cool. I had no idea. The story is pretty self-contained, really. You've returned home to find that things are awry, and you then make preparations to set out and solve the mystery as to why everything just kinda sucks in the area at the moment. The overworld consists of just a few select places that are not terribly far from the original town, but the story is pretty solid as you work to find the sword that would destroy evil, like Zelda, and then make your way to the last boss for the final showdown. Again, this game is pretty comparable to Zelda 2 as it focuses on 2D side-scroller gameplay with RPG and adventure elements. Like Zelda 2, there's experience that helps to power up the hero, and there's also the mechanic of gathering gold to purchase upgrades for your person. I didn't expect this game to be similar to Zelda 2 when I first tried it. It wasn't until just a few years ago that I played it, whereas I played Zelda 2 back when I was a kid. It was a pleasant surprise, and though I haven't beaten this game yet, I think I have enough determination to do it. That's the awesome thing about these Zelda clones. You know you are getting a game from folks who appreciated what Zelda did before them and attempted to make a game comparable, at least in some regards. Faxanadu's a pretty cool game. I really like it, and I think I will eventually commit to finish that game. This next game is very comparable to Faxanadu, but it's much, much more colorful. Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap. This game might actually exceed Zelda in charm. It is so incredibly colorful, and dare I say, cute? But that's not a bad thing. Being cute definitely doesn't make the game easier. It's actually pretty tough, but it's not insurmountable. And it's also one of my favorites now, because holy smokes, I really dug it. I had never played it until it came out on the Switch. While traveling a few years ago, I picked it up on the Switch and absolutely played it to death. It's weirdly addictive. The Switch version is remastered, but allows you to switch back and forth between the old graphics and sound and the new graphics and sound pretty seamlessly. The gameplay is extremely similar to Zelda 2, where you again traverse towns, gain information, scout out new items and abilities, and work your way toward the ultimate bad guy. It differs somewhat by the transformations that you learn along the way into different animals, but Zelda 2 has the spell system, which is, I would argue, comparable. The use of spells in Zelda 2 and the use of abilities in Monster Boy each allow players to progress in the world and story of the game, all while looking comparable to the side-scrolling portions of Zelda 2. I can't recommend this game enough. There is, of course, the original hardware, but this game is also available in a plethora of places, from the Master System to the Switch, PS4, and Xbox One. There are so many ports and ways to play this game. There is really no reason not to. Check it out. The next game is a Greek version of Zelda 2, and after that is an odd choice of game that I am just so excited to share with people. The Battle of Olympus for the NES. This game looks so similar to Zelda 2. The momentum of the character walking and jumping and slashing all feels so close to Link. And there's even that swinging stabby motion. If you've ever played Zelda 2, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not quite as good as Link's combat, but it's still very solid. The issue here is that you don't gain any sort of experience. You get some currency that you can use, but killing over and over and over doesn't really help all that much. There are so many NPCs to talk to in this game. Holy smokes. You travel town to town visiting NPCs for instructions and the gods to get upgrades to continue your quest, which is, of course, just like Zelda 2. I mean, at least in getting the items to progress. Zelda 2 was more about visiting palaces and defeating bosses. These towns too, folks, are absolutely just lousy with the enemies. They're everywhere. There's these little purple boogers too that are just, they're so frustrating. But you know what? That's a story for another day. You sort of undertake quests in this game, at least to the point that people, they mention what they're looking for, and you find it and bring it back. Well, that's questing. That's questing. Moving on. The bigger boss sprites are awesome. I think the character models for this game are fairly a little better designed than the Zelda 2 ones. But again, that's to be expected since this game came out later. So this game certainly borrowed from Zelda 2, or Rambo, it's hard to tell. But Zelda 2 will have its revenge. Music-wise, this is kind of repetitive and bad. It's not great. I'm not enjoying it. You know what? We're just going to turn it off. Just stop it. And then finish this. I don't want to spoil too much, but eventually there is a very comparable fight near the end of this game compared to Zelda 2's last fight. Either way, I think this game is totally worth the short amount of time it takes to play through it. It is. It's good fun. James Bond 007 for the Game Boy. What? Okay, I said Rambo was an odd one, but this game blew me out of the water. I couldn't believe how much like Link's Awakening this game is. But baby, believe it. First off, both games are action-adventure games that feature that familiar top-down perspective. In James Bond 007, players control the titular character as he navigates various levels and completes objectives. While in Link's Awakening, players control the titular character Link as he explores the island of Koholint and completes dungeons. Not a big deal, right? But there's more. Both games have a big focus on puzzle solving. In James Bond 007, players must often use gadgets and weapons to overcome obstacles and progress through levels, like obtaining a sword to cut grass. A sword to cut grass. What? While in Link's Awakening, players must solve puzzles with the game's dungeons to obtain new items and progress the story. This is literally the same idea. Link didn't use a gun, but he had projectiles, right? He had arrows. A neat example of a puzzle. Let me share this. I experienced this when I was trying to get by a guard. A dude in the corner drew attention to a blinking light in the room, and I said, there's no way that I'm just going to shoot this light and get past this dude. And then I shot that light, and the lights went out. And then I walked right by the guy. It boggled me to think about this on the Game Boy. That seems weirdly sophisticated for a Game Boy game. The controls are set up like Link's Awakening. Set an item to A or B and you go with it. You traverse screen after screen solving problems and moving on to areas. Eventually you square up against bosses, like in Zelda, in order to progress the game and story, and come on, just look at it. This game is reasonably priced at the moment, so if I were a Zelda fan who didn't own this game, and I am, and I don't own this game yet, I'd recommend snagging it before more people catch on that this is a solid Zelda game with a very cool James Bond skin stretched over it. And the James Bond flavoring here, whether it be the locations, tasks, or even the humor, are on point. Even if you don't like Zelda, which, why would you be watching this video? Why would you have made it this far and not subscribed. Why would you have made it this far in the video if you didn't like Zelda, right? If you like James Bond, this game is totally worth having. It was probably the most shocking on the list when I was looking around for Zelda clones. I just couldn't believe I had never even heard of this game for the Game Boy. To my knowledge, outside of emulation, there is no other place to play this game currently. If there is, again, please sound off in the comments. Hook us all up. There are so many games on here that are excellent Zelda-like games. If you have played all the other Zelda games, consider these. If you like more than just the story of Zelda, like perhaps you're just into the gameplay of Zelda and that's what you really appreciate about Zelda, I'd highly recommend getting these games. There are so many more Zelda clones out there, and I think I want to keep looking for more. I want to thank you personally so much for watching this video. Thank you. If you enjoyed this, consider some of my other content. If you have any suggestions for other clone series or Zelda-like games I should check out, let me know in the comments. I read every single comment that I get. Otherwise, I pray you guys will give these games a try. It's worth it. It's worth your time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these games or other games because, after all, gaming discourse is important and we should continue.